Hello and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today I have a very special friend here, filmmaker Art Arutyunyan here, and we're going to discuss Soviet films. And it's one of those things where you don't really understand or appreciate it until you've actually seen the films, and you begin to see that we're not so different in terms of our filmmaking or storytelling capabilities. So we're going to have a deep dive in three of the movies today, and there are plenty more for us to take a look at. So if you're interested in seeing more of our discussions and reviews, remember to hit that like button. Let us know down below if there are any movies that you'd like us to take a look at. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to support the channel, please subscribe. It helps immensely, and it shows us that we're doing something right. But let's go ahead and get started. Art, how are you doing today on this fine Saturday afternoon?
I'm doing so well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Happy to see you.
yeah, and I'm so excited to have you back on the show because we had a very interesting discussion last time about how you went from fashion designer into filmmaking, and you were also talking about growing up in was it Uzbekistan, correct?
Yes, yes.
At that time, which was part of the Soviet sphere of influence. But we did have a discussion about looking at Soviet films, and you sent me a list. I think it was like 6 or 7 movies. And I just thought to myself, that's a lot of movies to get through. So I picked 3 that we're going to take a look at today. We're going to take a look at The Girls from 1961, Office Romance, which is from 1976, and then Solaris from 1972 by Andrei Tarkovsky. But I want to go ahead and just get started with with these movies because growing up in Uzbekistan, were these movies that you were constantly watching, that were constantly influencing you? What was it about these movies that made you fall in love with the filmmaking process?
Yeah, those are, The Girls and Office Romance. Those are the films that everyone watched. They were first in theaters, but then they also on TV. Office Romance specifically is something that people watch every New Year's Eve because people get around the table and they have a lot of food and all the families there, and that's what's in the background. That's one of the quintessential films that we all watched on New Year's Eve. That was like a tradition because it's such an uplifting film, and it's on a longer side. I think it's 2 parts, so it kind of covers the evening in a way. And that was one of the staples of entertainment. The Girls is also very much an uplifting film. The difference with what I like about The Girls is now looking back at it, the cinematography is pretty stunning. I was really impressed by it watching it for the 10th time now when I'm making films myself. It's a wider screen ratio, which wasn't very common, at that time. At the time, everything was square,
Yeah, it was like the 4:3 ratio, wasn't it?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
it's wider, and I think the choice the director made was to cover that Siberia setting, the snow and the pine trees, and and the whole lumber production, whatever they were involved in. So I was very impressed, and also looking carefully at it, the way they frame things and the way they construct the compositions is also very inspirational. I mean, you can literally pull from it and construct your own, design your film to look like that, and it would look really modern and really contemporary. So those 2 films were like staples, right? Solaris, on the other hand, is a kind of an outlier because Tarkovsky, as much as he's revered and admired today, and every time someone releases a film of the best films of ever made, there's always a Tarkovsky film. Like if they ask Scorsese or even Christopher Nolan, they all name Tarkovsky as one of their influences. But it wasn't, Tarkovsky's films were never very commercially viable in Soviet Union. It wasn't something that people ran to watch in theaters. So, and that's why he had issues with the government later, and the Ministry of Culture never kind of, warmed up to his aesthetic. But his film did win awards outside of Soviet Union. Solaris won Grand Prize at the Cannes Film Festival.
Right, right.
So I think that's why it kind of the prestige of it outside of Soviet Union kind of allowed him to keep making those movies because they were all financed by the government. You know, all the Soviet films are financed by government. They're financed by Ministry of Culture. That's how it was. It was never like private investors. There's no such thing in Soviet Union. Um, so yeah, so that's in a way, Solaris stands out as a film that wasn't really commercially viable, and you can tell why, right? It's not the plot wise, it's not really for everyone, and the way he designs his film, slow pacing, longer takes. We appreciate that now, and as you mentioned earlier when we talk, Christopher Nolan comes to mind as someone who kind of uses similar tools. But the difference between Christopher Nolan and Tarkovsky is that Nolan also is aware of commercial aspect of his films, and he
Hmm.
wants to make sure the wider range of audiences would understand the film, and that's why his films make a lot of money, because it's not only beautifully constructed and designed, but it also has a strong plot. It also has character development, and he kind of doesn't pollute his films with long takes, unnecessary long takes, or unnecessary visuals. But Tarkovsky does. There's a lot of visuals in his films where you can argue that they don't really serve purpose for the plot necessarily, but they definitely enhance the experience. Tarkovsky's films, for me, especially Solaris, it's almost like he draws from his memories and his dreams, and that's why they kind of seep. When you watch his films, they seep deep into your like veins, and you don't know why you're feeling the way you're feeling, and you can't figure it out, and you probably need a therapist to figure those things out. But it's like that melancholic, right? That's this melancholic kind of feeling, and you kind of like start thinking about your own dreams and your own memories of your childhood or your parents, or your deepest, darkest, most melancholic moments. So yeah, those are kind of key differences between these three films. But I love them equally for sure.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, because with Solaris, it comes off as the most ambiguous of them all, and
Mm,
any filmmaker who comes after Tarkovsky, especially with Nolan's movie Inception, because you remember at the end of Inception, you had that little top spinning, but you don't know if it's still in a dream or not.
yeah.
I I I have to keep asking myself, he's thinking of the island at the end of that movie, like that's what he's thinking of. Because you
Mm,
don't because you don't know what really happens at the end of that movie,
hmm.
and as frustrating as it can be for modern audiences, because we live in absolutes, we have to know if what the definitive answer is. Sometimes we need those ambiguities, and you mentioned earlier about how Tarkovsky is all about pacing. Like the first few minutes of the movie, I felt a bit antsy, I felt a bit impatient, because
Hmm.
I thought,
Hmm.
there's a thought, come on, just get on with it. But as the movie progresses, you learn to slow down. And I think that's the genius of Tarkovsky, is he is because he also mentioned about how other movies made at that time were focusing too much on things like technology or stuff like that, instead of focusing inward. I think the biggest target of his ire was 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Hmm.
But what I really admire about Tarkovsky is the fact that he's able to slow you down to the point where you can begin to appreciate, like you said, all the visual cues that you see. So when so by the time you get to to Act 3 or Part 3, you're in tune with what's going on around you, because he's slowed you down enough to where you can begin to appreciate what's going on around you.
Hmm.
Because and I don't know how you feel about this, but with modern filmmaking, I mean, I mean, from the very first scene, it's go, action. There's
Yeah.
explosions, people are shooting at you. There's love making. There's all this stuff. So
Hmm.
you really don't have any time to catch your breath or figure out what's going on. And I think, and I think it's sort of a two-way street, because we as the audience are feeding our expectations into what we want in the movie, and the movies today are feeding it to us, which then feeds our expectations. So what I love about what Tarkovsky does, and what these other filmmakers do as well, is the fact that that they let us know that there was a time in filmmaking where that wasn't the case. It was a time where they didn't treat you like idiots. They treated you as if you were intelligent, really.
Mm.
Even with something like Office Romance, like when you watch it, like you begin to sort of get the impression that these aren't just dull people working in office. They're smart and savvy, but they're smart and savvy in their own way. It's almost like watching Seinfeld, really.
Mm.
If Seinfeld was set in Russia, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
even the girls. I mean, you begin to see a bit of a Shakespearean element to it,
Mm.
because you would think, after the Iron Curtain comes down, and the Soviet Union and all of its blocks in Eastern Europe and Central Asia are kind of cut off from the West, you would think that nobody is going back and forth. But as you
Mm.
watch these movies, it's far from the truth. Like these, the East and the West are communicating with each other, right? So just
Yeah.
because there's a political, isolation going on, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a cultural isolation.
Right.
Um, what I also thought was interesting too, because growing up, my perception of the Soviet Union was that there was only one type of filmmaking that was permitted, and it was propaganda filmmaking. And you remember those black and white reels of people saying, everything is going great in the Soviet Union, the fatherland is thriving, Comrade Khrushchev, shows,
Hmm.
capitalist, pigs how superior they are by sending the first man to space, stuff like that. So you would think, oh, these people have no culture, they don't make any movies. But then you watch a movie like The Girls, and it's like, no, these people have a sense of humor. They really they know how to live life, and it's not just um this dull existence that we in the West have made it out to be. So this actually transitions to the first movie I want to talk about, is The Girls.
Mm.
Um, so so when I was watching The Girls, it didn't surprise me that it was set in Siberia at a logging camp. That part didn't shock me at all. It's the fact that you have this girl Tosya, who is this happy-go-lucky girl who's got pigtails, which is, I guess, the universal sign of the innocent ingenue, when you think about it, because apparently that if a girl has pigtails, that means she's innocent, and she's naive about the world. But you can't help but fall in love with her from the very beginning, because she is just so innocent and so fun loving that you just want to take her side on everything. So I want to start off the conversation by talking about what was it about The Girls in particular that, when you watched it for the first time, that made you think, I really, really love what's going on in the story, and what keeps bringing you back to that movie over and over again. Because I can definitely see someone turning on that movie, on a rainy Saturday afternoon when they've got nothing to do, and feel good about it for the next hour and 40 minutes.
Mm. Yeah. So the girls kind of takes you out from wherever you are. When you start watching it, it takes you out of your head, and you go into Siberia, and you watch all these white shots of the logging and the lumberjack business, whatever, the production of lumber,
Hmm.
and the snow and the pine trees and the hills, and it takes you out of it, and you almost want to cozy up and drink something hot and just enjoy the ride, right? And then, as you said, as you were mentioning a little bit, why we fall in love with the lead character, is that actress Nadezhda Rumantseva. She was like this comedic genius, and she went on to do a lot of comedic roles, like similar to that.
She was like Lucille Ball, if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say she's kind of like a Soviet era Lucille Ball for sure. She has the physical comedy down. She's very natural. You really believe that she's that character, because somebody else doing that role, you'd be like, it's just a little, like, eh. But she really nailed it. Like yeah, she embodies that character. And in real life, she's very small and very kind of. Um, um, yeah, she looks like she belongs with the ponytail, with the pigtails and stuff like that. But yeah, you fall in love with her because it's just that comedic genius, of hers that really works, and very authentic, and in a dramatic moment, she really shines as well. So she does both really well, which I find that best comedic actors and actresses, they can do both really, really well, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, the what draws me to this film, why I put it on the list is, yeah, that's that storyline of this awkward girl arriving fish out of water, and then she's surrounded by all these other women, and yeah, they're much more glamorous than she is. She's, I believe, she's from orphanage, so she's kind of,
Yeah,
yeah, she's an orphan, so she has that chip on her shoulders, right?
and she went to
Um,
cooking school too.
right, and she starts cooking. Yes, yes. Um, it's just a beautiful film, but it's not you don't have to think too much. You kind of go with the ride, and the way the story is structured, you can't look away. You just have to know what's going on next. So it's very well structured. And you're right when you were saying, we think Soviet Union, that's it's a different world. It is, but at the same time, storytelling was in our blood, since we were little, and a lot of, and it's all influenced by a lot of Russian and Soviet writers, Tolstoy and whatnot, Chekhov. Um, but what made it different from, let's say, other communist countries, as far as culture goes, as far as filmmaking goes, and taste, is that
Hmm.
Soviet Union consisted of 16 republics, 16 different cultures with their own languages, with their own history. And and they're all vastly different, because it covers, Soviet Union covered anywhere from Central Asia, which is Uzbekistan, where I'm from, Kyrgyzstan, which is more of an Asian country, Kazakhstan, and then we go into more mountainous areas, Armenia, Georgia,
Yeah, the
Azerbaijan.
Caucasus. Yeah,
Yeah, the Caucasus, different culture, completely different culture. And then we go into Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. That's more Nordic, like German influences, Swiss, influences. So you can tell, like, all of this kind of melting pot kind of created some sort of a hybrid. Yes, these films are in Russian, and they were filmed by Russian studios, because that was the center of the Soviet Union. But it's all influenced, by different cultures. So I think that's why it makes it Soviet films are so unique in that way. There is a propaganda, including the girls. There is a propaganda in a way that young people were encouraged to move to these harsh areas to help the development, of the country and the economy. So we were kind of, it was all encouraged to be part of the team and part of the development of the country, as opposed to as opposed to being more individualistic. Like, I want my success, I'm going to build on my own success. It's more like, no, come join the team and help us, improve the economy and living situation for everyone. So in that regard, I think there's like this hidden propaganda there, and we can recognize it in probably most of the Soviet films. But there is an entertaining element to it. There is aesthetic element to it, the storytelling element to it, and then all the actors are amazing, no matter how small the roles are. They all come from this theater background. They study theater, they study all those tools. So yeah, that's the girls.
I was going to say, because the movie is set well, story-wise, it's set in the 50s, but but it was released in 1961. Movies made at that time, they sort of speak to an optimism, right?
Mm,
So I think this is something that's common, in filmmaking throughout the world, not just in the West or in the Soviet Union. It's the fact that they paint this idealized lifestyle, right? So, like, a big one for me would be, like, if you watch like the Dick Van Dyke Show or Leave It to Beaver or any of those shows, they always show what the ideal life is like. This is what it means to be an American. It's having a stay-at-home mother, two kids who go to school and make good grades, and a father who works, and they live in suburbia with a nice house, maybe one or two cars, a white picket fence, all that stuff. With the girls, I sort of get the feeling that they're trying to show what the ideal life is in the Soviet Union. I mean,
Hmm.
yes, they're in Siberia, but they're showing it as, to your point, they're showing it more in a propagandistic light, where it's, even in the harshest environments, these are people who are hardy and who are just happy about doing what they do, and they
Hmm.
can accomplish anything. I do want to talk about Ilya though, because Ilya comes off as a very peculiar character to me, because with everybody else you can sort of understand where they're coming from, but Ilya is one of those people where, you know he's the love interest of Tosya, but he's also doing his own thing. Because I know at the beginning of the movie they take down the picture of the former, I guess, goal leader, and they put his picture up instead. And he and
Hmm.
and and you see him later on in his cabin, where he and his friends, they sort of develop like a scheme to like fell more trees, right?
Hmm.
So you kind of get the idea that he's this industrious fellow, but at the same time he's also developing an interest in Tosia, and he puts this bet famously for a hat. If I can get her to follow me around like a dog, then I win your hat. um
Hmm.
so so maybe we can talk about who Ilya is and what we think he's really up to, because on the one hand we see Ilya as the ideal industrious, Soviet citizen who is being innovative and, doing things to better the fatherland. But at the same time, you sort of see this individualistic, nature come out. Like you said, you know
Yeah.
it's this idea that we're all supposed to be doing this as a community. Individualism not permitted, but at the same time Ilya is sort of like, he's sort of like, that dirty little thing that people don't talk about, that kind of rears his ugly head. So maybe we can chat about that, because he's such a fascinating character.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, he is ambitious. He has ambition, right? Even though it's within the constraints of what ambition, what kind of ambitions are allowed
Hmm.
in that setting. He is ambitious, right? So a rebel in a way, right? He doesn't. He's a leader. He's not a follower, and he wants to be better than everyone else. Um,
He's like a Siberian James Dean almost, if you think about it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yes, there were constraints. Yes, within Soviet Union, you weren't allowed to be overtly ambitious, or you don't stick your head out and stuff like that. But humans are humans, and at the end of the day, we're all the same. Some of us are more ambitious than others, and Ilya is the character where no matter where you put him, he's gonna want to be the best at what he does. He's, like I said, he's very ambitious, and he wants to achieve things, and he wants to win, and he wants to be better than the other guys. Um, but yeah, but there is this Machiavellian side to him, where he basically wants to play this trick on this girl, and he wants to bet that she would follow him as a dog, as you said.
Hmm.
So that's a little dark, you
Yeah.
know. But that just goes to show that these filmmakers, they found ways to get their films and their scripts approved by the Ministry of Culture, that had really strict rules of what's approved and what's greenlit by the ministry. They found ways to incorporate their own, aesthetics and their own ideas of storytelling, their own character developments into it. And that's not easy to do. When you're told that you have to hit certain notes, A, B, C, but then how do you incorporate your own ideas, and how do you make your film unique from others. So yeah.
That's another thing that kind of made me scratch my head, because I was doing some research on this. So basically, everything had to be approved by Moss Films, right?
Mm.
Or
Yeah, the
or, or
minute
is it the Ministry of Culture? I just want
Ministry
to
of
clarify.
Culture, yeah,
Okay.
everything, every film, every script, every song, anything that's culture related had to be approved, unless otherwise it's not it's not happening. Nobody's gonna print the book. Nobody's gonna release the album. Nobody's gonna finance the film. Yeah, everything has to be approved. And I'm sure they had a person on set who was who was, making sure that we stay to the script. Nothing is improvised too much.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of like it would be like if the producer was on set, in the West, and they were just making sure that everything was running smoothly, right? You
Yeah.
had someone from like a liaison from the ministry. Okay.
Yes. Absolutely.
What I also think is interesting about Ilya is that later on we find out that he had a fling with some of the other girls in that camp too, because Anfisa, Anfisa, runs into him.
Ну, и нравится тебе такая жизнь?
Нравится. Анфиса Павловна!
Подожди ты, Вадим. Ой, жалко мне тебя, Илюшенька. Смеются все вокруг над тобой.
Ну и пусть.
Даже так?
Да.
Пойдем-ка, Илюшенька, потанцуем.
Весело ты живешь, Анфиска.
Так я же не влюбленная, Илюшенька. Не влюбленная. Извините меня, пожалуйста, Вадим Петрович.
And she's like, hey, I see you're down. Do you want to, hang out and like do some things? And he's like, no, because you can tell by that point he's pretty much lovesick with Tosya, and the fact that Ilya, has found himself in that funk where, and this is what I find so brilliant too, is the fact that if you think about it, Tosya doesn't really change her tone. She kind of like remains resolute throughout the film.
Yeah.
Whereas Ilya, ironically, Ilya finds himself who's sort of following her, because there's so many funny scenes where the biggest one that stands out to me is when he's I think he's like in a canteen, or is he like in a train or something, and he keeps going up trying to talk to Tosya, and Tosya doesn't want to talk to him, so she just gives him like another helping of gruel, and he goes back to his seat, he sits down, and he's just like eating it, and I keep thinking to myself, and I kept thinking to myself, wow, he's really committed to this. Like he really, really like wants to be with her, but the way they execute is just so brilliant. But to go back to Anfisa, what struck me was the fact that Anfisa, later on, she becomes really, really upset, and she just starts crying for no reason. And Tosya tries to comfort her, but then you come to find out that Anfisa is angry at Tosya and Ilya, because of the fact that Ilya, when he dated her, never saw her as someone who could be like, a potential mate later on in life. He just saw her as a good time. Whereas with Tosya, he sees something far more different. What did you think about the whole romantic tone of the movie? Because Anfisa does get this brilliant, if somewhat cynical attitude about love. And then she comes to realize, I witnessed firsthand, love really, it's not a fairy tale, it's a real thing. And I don't think I'll ever find anybody who's gonna, love me the way that Ilya loves Tosya, which just makes it all the more upsetting. So what did you think about that? In terms of how it got incorporated into the storytelling, and how it possibly resonated with audiences when they watched it.
Yeah, I like it because it adds another layer, first of all, to Anfisa's character, right? The supporting character, sort of like a antagonist a little bit. Just adds an extra layer to the storytelling and to the romance of it. Because she's a more glamorous, beautiful woman. But you're right, he never loved her for who she is. He loved her because she was fun, she was beautiful, and everyone else wanted to be with her. But he never really cared to get to know her or understand her. And we get to know her later when she breaks down and she kind of confesses that, he never really loved me for who I was. He just loved me for how I looked and how fun I was, Yeah, I like that. That's a layered storytelling. That's the screenwriter not neglecting the supporting characters' storyline, because often we can fail to kind of give layers to our supporting characters, and we kind of focus on the main storyline. But I do like that. It just goes to prove that these people crafted their scripts and their films with care and paid attention to all these things. Yeah.
So from a filmmaker's standpoint, in terms of the story, did you? I mean, do you find the way that they told their stories like in line with how you understand filmmaking, or do you feel like they sort of buck the trend in what would be conventional storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much reminiscent of traditional, as we call Hollywood romantic comedy. You
Hmm.
know, you can almost recognize some of the main beats. So, so I would say Hollywood didn't invent that structure, to be honest. You know, it's
Yeah.
been there. And even in earlier Russian and Soviet films, like from the 50s and 40s, you can see those beats. You know, those three-act structure, and yeah, so it's just ingrained there. Yeah, I do recognize that it's the structure is there. Yeah,
Yeah. And
traditional.
and what I also find so charming too is the fact that it's set in Siberia in a very snowy environment, and if we know anything about Lifetime and Hallmark movies, everything's more romantic in the snow. Um,
Mm,
what I will say this, what I did find a bit a bit strange was the fact that Ilya makes this bet, right? And
yeah.
then the bet gets resolved later on when Tosya confronts I forget who the other guy was that he makes a bet with, but she takes
Mm.
his hand, she gives him to Ilya, and she's like, there's your prize, and we never hear any more of it. um I mean, a part of me kind of wish that that the other guy may have wanted to get in, so you kind of create this conflict between Ilya and the other guy for wanting Tosya's affection, but at the same time I can sort of see where it can be a bit too much. did you
Mhm.
did you think that if there were any ways they could have improved it, or do you think it kind of works as it is?
I think it works as it is. Yes, you can add more elements to it, more layers to it. You can add more scenes to it. But I think at the end of the day, if it works as it is, then it's probably that's it. You know, you don't need to mess with it. Another thing I want to bring out about the girls is that they create like this sense of community. The theme of friendship is really strong in this film, because when at the end and when all these women do come together, that's like, oh, okay, we're done, this story is done, because that's, and also when the guys get together to buy a watch, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for someone to give to his girlfriend or something like that, because he
Yeah,
couldn't
yeah, yeah,
afford it.
Ilya. Yeah, because Ilya wants
There
to
you
buy
go.
like a present for Tosya. Yeah.
And they all pitch in, right? Something like that, as I remember. So that's like, also very, very sort of Soviet era stereotypical element where that's how we build the community. It's all about community. It's about friendships. You give everything you have to your fellow humans. And also, there's a funny moment when she first arrives and she starts rummaging through through other women's.
I was wondering about that. I'm like, what is she doing? Like,
Yeah, it's all the Soviet. It's all about sharing. There's not no such thing as mine. It's ours. That's
you're right.
that's a key element of communism. But communism fails, as we all know. It doesn't work. But some elements in it are very sort of like based in basic humanity, I think. And she says, in the orphanage there was no such thing as mine. We all shared, and there was no like this is my book. No, it's everyone. Here,
Yeah.
use it. You don't have to ask, just use it. So it's like everything belongs to everyone, that kind of thing. There's some sweetness to it, I think.
Well, I will say this too, because because you also get the sort of familial connection with with the characters, because Tosia refers to one of the older ladies as Mama Vera.
Mm,
And obviously we know Tosia is an orphan, but I just can't help but think how the girls sort of not only look at each other as sort of sisters in a way, but they also look at their elder figures as as parental guides, really.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that's especially important for Tosia, because as an orphan she didn't have the proper family structure, so she kind of finds a surrogate one when she comes to this logging camp.
yeah,
Um, and even with characters like Anfisa, she still maintains the sort of familial connection with them, because you know because they're all she has, really. She she doesn't know anybody else in the camp. She's just trying to make her way through the world, and I think that just adds to the sweetness of the character, because she is so desperate to be loved, and she's so willing to love others, really. That that you kind of feel for her when she confronts Ilya about the whole thing. But at the same time, you could sort of feel for Ilya as well, because we know he's not a bad guy. Like, we know he's a good person. It's just he just needs to be straightened out. He needs to figure out where his priorities are. And by the end of the movie, when they're sitting outside and chatting, they begin to figure out that maybe we should be together, and maybe life wouldn't be so bad if we had each other in each other's lives.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah.